Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
Tony, I had someone ask me this week, are you disappointed that the Buckeyes are off this week? It's like, no, that I'm the exact opposite of disappointed after going cross country. You understand why they let teams, a lot of teams, the week after they have to make a cross country flight, they try to schedule a week off. You definitely have a sense for why that is. And it's like, oh, that's good. That makes sense. I'm sure it's mostly for our benefit, but I guess, whatever, for the players and the coaches too.
Yeah, no, it's definitely for our benefit. I was just thinking last year when we had to go to Wisconsin and then the next week go to Rutgers, and that takes a little bit out of you in back-to-back weeks. So at least they gave us me and you, the week off. We do appreciate that, and we'll get to watch some college football and whatnot. But before we can do that, we had to go back and rewatch Oregon's 32-31 win over Ohio State and talk about maybe some of the things we missed from watching it live in person. Tom down on the field of the stadium there, and me from the open air press box, which I would recommend everywhere in the nation go open air until about October 30th. And then close the windows up a little bit, turn the heat on. But it was a fantastic weather, fantastic setting, as we keep saying. And Buckeye fans may be sick of us saying this. So let's get into some of the things we learned. And I'll start first, Tom. And this was one that is neither necessarily here nor there, but it's something I saw on Twitter, people asking me, is the crowd really that loud? Because it's not coming across on television. And was swept. This NBC did not do a good job of bringing out the noise in this broadcast at all. I think CBS has always done a really good job of that with the SEC stuff over the years. I'm not sure if that has carried over to the Big Ten, but trust me when I tell you, it was loud the entire time, and it certainly didn't sound that way on the broadcast. So poor job by NBC there.
Yeah, and that's all just audio mix. That's just the people in the truck deciding how much of this mic and how much of that mic. And I'm sure the decision was made that if you have the crowd too loud, then the old people complain that they can't hear the announcers. So that's why you make that decision. But yeah, it definitely did not capture the environment, the setting there in Eugene. And that's true of a lot of broadcasts. I was listening to a Mets radio broadcast, I don't know, one of the earlier playoff rounds, and the announcer said, now listen to this crowd, and then stop talking. And the crowd was very quiet. And like very clearly, if you go back and watch on TV, people are going insane, but the mix is just a little off. So yeah, allow me to assure you that was a very loud crowd that was in the game the whole time. And they were in the game the whole time. It's loud, but they were in the game the whole time because it was a heck of a football game. That was a great football game. Even just going back and watching it again, knowing the outcome, it's like, man, this is a good football game. Just punch, counter punch, just back and forth. And every time it looked like someone was about to seize the game, someone made a play or they had a mistake or whatever. And it stayed within one score. One thing that I've kind of had as a takeaway is you can look at this from, you see Ohio State fans saying, if only if not for this and this and this, we could have won the game by a couple scores. And you can just as easily make the case for Oregon. If only they hadn't botched an extra point and missed a field goal and had, gotten stopped on the one and gotten, they had a bunch of, if only this, they could have won by a couple scores. But man, that was a game that was just back and forth. And rewatching it, I sort of feel like Oregon played pretty well. I think that was probably about an A- game for Oregon and maybe a B game for Ohio State. And for that to work out that way on the road, yeah, we said this after the game. I can't wait to watch those two teams play again.
Yeah, no, even as you said, rewatching it, it holds up basically over time, and it's still a very, very good game. And you feel the tension the entire time, and especially the 60-minute version just flies by. Trust me. But in terms of the Ohio State defense, one of the things that kind of assumed watching it live, but then rewatching it, is just how much the secondary was just sitting at the sticks and waiting for the short passes. And And boy, Oregon, they seemed like they were saving this up for this game and like purposefully didn't throw downfield. And we talked about how they haven't thrown downfield to the right side, I think all year long. And then they did it in this one and caught Ohio State flat-footed. And to me, watching this, it felt like the defensive order, the defensive plan was basically, if they beat us deep, so be it. Let's force them to beat us deep. And then Dillon Gabriel went and threw it deep better than maybe he's ever done. He connected on some stuff that he has not connected on this season and has tried. The deep shots have not been accurate throws for Gabriel this season. He was on the money on just about all of them in this one. But I know Denzel Burke is getting a ton of grief for all of the catches that he gave up. But you can see him and you see other guys just basically just stopping. Like, you're not allowed to go past me. I'm at the sticks. You're not allowed to go past me. And on the first long play he gave up, Caleb Downs is doing the same thing. And Tez Johnson puts one move on him and he's completely by him even more than Stewart was on Burke. And so, he got beaten. Jordan Hancock was flagged for pass interference. Davison Igbinosun was flagged for pass interference. I feel like the overall game plan was fine based on history and the expectation that Dillon Gabriel wouldn't be able to capitalize, but they did. And so now the next time you play them, that has to factor in. But overall, just sitting on the sticks and expecting everything they had seen to that point to happen, and it didn't. They pressured or they pushed Dillon Gabriel to throw deep accurately, and he did, made Ohio State pay. So, kudos to that guy for not the game of his life, but one of the games of his life throwing the ball.
Definitely. That was a probably top 10% Dillon Gabriel game. And he was not as good as Will Howard was at times. Will Howard completed 80% of his passes, Gabriel 23-34, so 69% of his passes, but 341 yards passing, a couple of touchdowns. Will Howard played really well. Dillon Gabriel pretty much matched him, or if you want to look at it vice versa, you can do that. Had the long touchdown run as well. Mm-hmm. That did feel like Oregon was just sort of setting this up, because we talked about it a bunch last week. Look, they don't throw the ball at all downfield on the right-hand side. And, is that they can't do that or that they haven't been doing that? And Ohio State obviously felt like it wasn't something that Oregon was comfortable doing, and Oregon may have been just sort of setting that aside and letting you think that wasn't something they were comfortable doing, and then boom, they were just fine doing it. So definitely a sort of laid a trap for Ohio State. It feels like. The really interesting thing is now you're in a game, you're in a situation where you probably are, there's at least a decent possibility you're going to play this team again. And so then now what's the counter punch coming up next time for Oregon? What's the adjustment for Ohio State? That's going to be a really interesting thing for us to talk about. You wonder if Ryan Day, as a guy with an NFL background, has a little bit of an advantage because you've had to do that in the past and had to deal with playing teams multiple times. Chip Kelly, obviously the same way. So we'll see how that all plays out. One thing that I noticed was, I don't know where to start with the offensive line. I walked away thinking, the offensive line played pretty decently. And then rewatching it was kind of like, maybe. I mean, we can start with that Quinshon Judkins fumble. Both guards, that was Donovan Jackson got beat clean. I mean, just got whooped off the snap. And then it was Taker Shabola's guy who actually ended up forcing the fumble. But the offensive line, I came in thinking they held up pretty well against Iowa. So I was expecting them to hold up pretty well against Oregon, and they were okay. But there was a lot that ended up being, they didn't run the ball at all in the second half. And I think some of that had to do with Josh Simmons and him being out. But there was a lot also of Will Howard sort of making pass rushers miss and buying some time in the pocket. Because watching live, I thought, I'm surprised Ed Michalski's holding up better than I was expecting him to. And then you go back and watch, and it's like, Will Howard was kind of making some chicken salad out of back in the pocket at times, because there was more pressure coming, and Will Howard did more to avoid the rush at times than the line did in terms of providing him with time.
Yeah, we talked after the game. It seemed like Zen Michalski held up, and then you were watching. It's like, we're more like held on. And, there were some close calls in there. I'm with you. The offensive line, I was surprised that they struggled as much as they did. You take away the two rushes for Henderson, the 17-yarder and the 53-yarder. Outside of those two runs, Judkins and Henderson averaged 2 yards a carry between them. And that's an offensive line thing. And, and Will Howard was able to escape some pressure here and there. But yeah, that one makes you reassess the offensive line, even aside from the Josh Simmons injury, which is a huge thing that we will continue to talk about moving forward in next coming week or so once we talk to Ryan Day next Tuesday. But the interior, I expected more from, and so they've got to continue to learn from this one. But I don't know how often they're going to face somebody like Derek Harmon until Michigan, where you've got Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. So you've got 5 games to prepare for that kind of mess. And so this one, I think, just makes you reassess where things are and where you thought they were. And then also, while you're all reassessing that, you may be kicking a guard out to tackle to replace Josh Simmons. So have fun with that one. I want to go to the end of the game, to that 12th man situation, because I think one of the underrated aspects of that is that one of those 12 defenders was a deep safety over top of Jeremiah Smith on the bottom of the field, away from where the throw was going to go. Jabbar Muhammad is the corner defending Jeremiah Smith on that play, and he knows he's got deep help, so he can be more aggressive in stopping that short throw, which he does. He breaks the pass up because he knows he's got a 12th defender behind him, and so there's really not necessarily a reason to have that 12th defender over there when you've got the flood over on the other side. But having that extra defender allowed him to be more aggressive and allowed him to break up the pass. And Tom, I'm not even going to mention the fact that when the ball hit the ground, there were 7 seconds on the clock. I'm just not even going to go there.
Yeah, there were a bunch of things at the end of that game that kind of all added up to sort of go against Ohio State's chances to kick a game-winning field goal there. The 12th man thing, I mean, obviously at the time it was like, oh boy, well, that was a mistake. And it didn't, I don't know that anyone thought, oh, this was an intentional decision to do this. But since then, oh boy, has the narrative around that changed. First, Dan Lanning was a genius, and then the NCAA went in to change the rule. I mean, they're in the process of changing the rule immediately, which is pretty unusual to make a rules change in the middle of the season, and they're going to issue a bulletin or something like that about the fact that, hey, you have to that's now going to be treated as a reset the clock kind of situation. So yeah, I mean, it was a creative solution, certainly, but in a lot of ways, both in terms of keeping Jeremiah Smith from getting the ball, but also trading 5 yards for 4 seconds of time when the clock was that tight. It was a very clever solution, but the NCAA obviously looking at it and going, no, you shouldn't be able to do that. And credit to Dan Lanning for finding the loophole, taking the loophole, but probably a good thing for teams for the NCAA to kind of lock down before it becomes a viable strategy moving forward. All right. So how about this one? Boy, the fumbled snap by Will Howard, that was an even bigger play. It happened right before the end of the third quarter. So it happened, and I kind of just went running from one end of the field to the other because we change ends of the field as photographers. So you always have the team coming towards you. So I didn't really stop to think about it at the time. But at that moment, the Buckeyes are up 28-22, 56 seconds left in the third. It's 3rd and 2 at the Ohio State 27. And you have a fumbled snap. That was the only time the Oregon defense got the Ohio State offense off the field all second half. And the Oregon defense had nothing to do with it. It was a snap that was a perfectly fine snap and just got bobbled and turned into a 5-6 yard loss. That was, there are a bunch of if onlys in that game, but the Oregon defense did not stop the Ohio State offense all second half. That play, I think, kind of got lost in all the stuff that happened later in the game. But man, oh man, that turned out to be an enormous momentum swing, an enormous swing in the game. Because if the Buckeyes go down there and score, even if they just kick a field goal, it's 31-29, and you're 31-22, and then you're up 9 points,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a 2-score game. That would have been their chance to take a 2-score lead for the only time for either team all game long. Instead, you have sort of an unforced error. You get off the field, and then Oregon goes right down and scores, and then they're up by a point.
Yeah. No, that one was not devastating, but it could have been so much better for Ohio State, and credit to Oregon for capitalizing on it. But that goes kind of into my next point, which is Dillon Gabriel having 2 snaps, one dribbled to him that he was able to pick up cleanly, another one that went over his head that he was able to pick up on like the second bounce. So twice he had issues that, bad snaps that could have turned into something for Ohio State, turned into nothing, and he fielded perfectly, and the ball bounced right to him and came right to him. The first one, which was a worm burner grounder, there was also like an illegal shift that went on that just I didn't even see it. I didn't even see it bouncing the live. It was just there was an illegal shift, and he was almost sacked because everybody just kind of stood around, and a defensive end came at him. And then the one that went over his head, I mean, he picked that up and was able to throw it for maybe like a 3-yard loss. But still, those are opportunities where, if you get a bad snap, and anything can happen at that point. And both times when anything could happen, it was, Oregon was able to just, and it wasn't, I don't think any of those were 3rd down killers like it was for Ohio State.
No, and I'm reminded of, I think it was maybe the 2019 Ohio State-Michigan game,
Mm-hmm.
where very early in the game, J.K. Dobbins gets a handoff, and it bounces on, he somehow dropped it. I don't remember the specifics, but he somehow dropped it. It bounced on the turf, and it bounced like a basketball straight up to him. Like he'd been just bouncing a basketball, bounced right up to him, and he caught it and kept running. And it was just kind of like, I remember at the time thinking, oh, okay, it's going to be one of those days. And it was kind of the same thing with the bouncer that
Mm-hmm.
Gabriel got. And because that, a snap over your head, that turns 1st and 10 into 2nd and 23, or 2nd and 8 into 3rd and 17. Those are generally, if not drive killers, drive attempted murderers. And for, to be able to turn that into a very short loss, and, potentially it could have been a short gain if they hadn't made the tackle there. That was a very, very fortunate bounce for Oregon. And, again, you can look at all this different stuff. I had not had a good look at the Will Kazmarek fumble / non-fumble on the first drive. Boy, I thought his back was to me, so I thought, well, he's got it. Why is the guy acting like he stole the ball away?
True.
And they never had a clear replay on the stadium video board, but you watched it on the TV copy, and it was like, oh boy, yeah, that probably should have been a fumble. So, there were certainly missed calls on both sides throughout the game. So, I don't know that that's something you can look at and point and say, well, the ref stole this game because of the offensive pass interference call. Like that was not a call that was made in the flow of the rest of the calls from the game, but also, you take the 7 points off the board from the first drive, and then it's a very different game. So you can't just kind of take one thing out of context and say that's, that definitely was the single thing that cost them the game.
And I think that's also where Kazmarek got hurt, because he left the game. He was holding his arm. You saw on that catch. But great job by the offense getting that snap off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they got up there before the snap, before the officials could call a replay. I don't understand why the replay booth didn't buzz that down.
Mm-hmm.
Like you saw the guy come out with the ball. Weren't you at least curious as to how that happens? Take 30 seconds, buzz down, take a look at it, and if it's nothing, it's nothing, and move on with life. But yeah, that was a weird one to me that they didn't buzz that one down. How about this one? There's been a lot of criticism of Ryan Day's clock management, and I think a lot of it, I was kind of curious because during the game, I was like, yeah, after the one penalty on Ohio State, the clock kept running on the OPI after that, and I think Ohio State didn't realize that the clock was going to run on the set as opposed to on the snap. So that was a little bit of an issue, but I think a lot of the criticism for Ryan Day for clock management comes from the announcers getting a little, agitated about that. And then if the announcers are getting agitated, everyone's going, obviously he's doing a terrible job. And it's like, I thought the clock management was fine. I saw criticism about Ryan Day finishing the game with a timeout in his pocket. And I don't think that that's really a valid criticism because they had the ball at the 28-yard line with 34 seconds left, plus a timeout in their pocket. At that point, you've gotten down the field. You're in sort of decent field goal range. It's about a 45-yarder from there. That was right before the pass interference call. But they took a shot down inside the 5 to Jeremiah Smith. Like they had the time they needed. They got the ball to basically where they needed to get it. They took a couple cracks, took responsible cracks, didn't have like, oh boy, that almost got picked off kind of plays. Yeah, the offensive pass interference call was an absolute killer in that last minute, but you have to have a timeout there because if you take the timeout with 16 seconds left, if they had just taken it after the offensive pass interference call, and you then get sacked on the next play, the game's over. That's it. You don't have any way to stop the clock. You only can throw the ball to the sidelines. You can't throw the ball down the middle of the field. You have to throw the ball to the sidelines. So that limits you so much. You can't run the ball. You can't do anything. It was very unfortunate for Ohio State that the timing worked out the way it did, and they didn't stop the clock with 7 seconds left after the one incompletion. Instead, it was 6. It's unfortunate for Ohio State that they lost that time on a rule that now is going to get changed because the NCAA goes, you probably shouldn't have lost that time. It was called correctly. To be clear, it was called correctly on the field, and all the articles about the potential rule change now specify it was called correctly. It was enforced correctly as the rules were written at the time. Obviously, that's a letter of the law versus spirit of the law thing. But as the rules were written, it was enforced correctly. So you can't say you were robbed. It was just that's how the rules were written. I think there was a lot of consternation and looking for someone to blame on at the end. And I don't think blaming Day was in clock management. I don't think that was anywhere near the top of the list in terms of what went wrong for Ohio State in that game. Could you have called your timeouts before the 2-minute warning and, maybe saved 3 seconds or something like that? Sure, you could have done that. There's a lot of this was a big conversation on our board as well that, if you called the timeout here, then the next play took 5 seconds and that would have taken, then you could have taken another timeout there. And the problem is if you do that, if you take your timeouts after the 2-minute warning, then the clock's running no matter what. So that makes it much more likely that Oregon's going to run the ball and not throw the ball in that situation. Because if it's 2:01 on the clock, they can throw the ball and it doesn't matter if it's incomplete or not. So you have to defend much more of the field. There's a lot of game theory that goes into this. And, I understand that as it worked out, yeah, a couple extra seconds would have been real useful for Ohio State. But at the 2:07 mark, you didn't necessarily think this is going to come down to 1 second one way or the other. So I think a lot of the criticism of Ryan Day's clock management probably was not quite fair and might have been based a little bit on how some of the reaction came from the TV crew.
Yeah. I mean, you lose, so there's going to be all of the, well, you could have done this, you could have done that. They lost 23 seconds on the sack to start that drive, which was a killer. The pass interference, the offensive PI, there were about 6 seconds lost as they waited to snap. And you've got Will Howard saying, let's go for about 3 seconds of that. So I think they tried to, they handled that as best they could. Could it have done better? Yeah, you can always squeeze a second or two here and there throughout. But yeah, that 23 seconds on the sack is that kind of, that put them behind the 8 ball even more than they already were. And yet they still managed to get down there and they had the timeout. And yes, they went back home with that timeout, but coaches would rather like cut off their left leg than use that last timeout until they absolutely need to, because we know, watch a coach who has to use his timeout before he wants to in that situation. And you will see a very angry and frustrated coach that now they no longer have the luxury of that timeout that they plan to use. They've already cashed that check. They've already basically written that. And now, they're just waiting for the deposit, but to not have it. And then that changes how you can do everything as well. But, yeah, get down a split second earlier, and then they would have had that timeout and they wouldn't have taken it with them. But them's the breaks. Let's see, Tom. Let's see. What else do I have? I've got a bunch of notes. The false starts, 4 false starts in this game. 2 only 2 drives with false starts. But I think the second one was maybe the start of the fourth quarter, and it led to a field goal and limited what could have been a touchdown drive. The other one earlier in the game, 2 false starts on the same drive, ends in a punt. In these games where every single yard, every single second matters, to give up penalties like that, we said it after the game, too many penalties for Ohio State, but to then double down, like, yes, one false start isn't bad enough. Let's go with the second. But that's, again, credit to the crowd, because they were allowed in the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, and it impacted the Ohio State offense throughout. And I'll just add one last thing onto this. Will Howard is a baller. And yeah, I thought he was really, really good in this game. Still, the customary 2 plays he'd love to have back, but he did well enough to win this game. And I'll fist fight anybody who disagrees, Tom.
Yeah, well, you don't have to fist fight me. I felt like that was, for the most part, a winning performance out of Will Howard. They're not going to grade him a champion, but that was, for the most part, a winning performance. You complete 80% of your passes, 326 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, avoided a lot of pressure in the pocket throughout the game, made guys miss in the pocket at times, did all the stuff that we've been talking about opposing quarterbacks doing against Ohio State over the years. A lot of J.J. McCarthy kind of just not, subtle movements to avoid the hits in the pocket. That I think was a really underrated part of his game. Yeah, he played really well. Someone else who played really well, who we probably didn't recognize enough on the postgame show, was Emeka Egbuka. 10 catches on 10 targets, 93 yards, 1 touchdown, long at 26. The story after the game was Oregon's receivers, Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, 14 catches on 18 targets, 224 yards, 2 touchdowns. Well, Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, 19 catches on 24 targets, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns. It probably says something that the game that the Oregon receivers had was so remarked upon and was kind of like almost the single big story of the game. And Ohio State's top 2 receivers had very, very similar statistical games, had made as many, scored as many touchdowns, made as many big plays. And it just kind of was like, oh yeah, well, Jeremiah Smith had the one big, had a big catch and a long catch and had a touchdown catch, and Emeka Egbuka had a touchdown catch, and that was kind of where it got left. But boy, that was big. And then even Carnell Tate was a little bit of an afterthought, only 2 targets, but he had a really big catch on that last drive as well for a 13-yard pickup that really helped after that sack to get them back on schedule.
Yeah, and 20 yards rushing for Emeka as well on 2 carries. They I don't think, I'm watching this, rewatching this, and I'm thinking, you can't use him enough. You can't get the ball to him enough, Emeka. And whether that's the 6-yard little out just to move the chains or keep them on schedule, whatever, find him and get him the ball as much as possible. A couple of thoughts that I had here. They got more pressure. Ohio State got more pressure than I remembered them. It's just Dillon Gabriel handled it remarkably well, stepped up and got rid of the ball. Some of those were so close to being batted down. Again, game of inches on the 4th down completion to Terrence Ferguson. It was Jordan Hancock coming in and gets his hands up and just misses knocking the pass down. That's something that would have changed things. Another one on Travion Henderson's 17-yard run, Tysheem Johnson, the starting safety, comes in and hits him helmet to helmet, and it's like, should that have been a targeting play? I don't know. I don't know what targeting is, Tom. I'm not going to pretend to know what targeting is. I just know sometimes when we see a helmet to helmet hit, there's a buzz from above. That's another thing. Maybe, I don't know if there's the instant replay people like use their allotment of buzzes, and they didn't seem too concerned about being part of this game overall, whether it was buzzing down for the Will Kazmarek thing, buzzing down to check the clock at the end of the game. They checked it at the end of the Notre Dame game last year. They didn't really have an interest in doing it this time.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear, no one is saying that the officials cost Ohio State to lose this game. This was just, you have instant replay, you have the Big Ten Command Center. This is obviously, no disrespect to whatever other Big Ten games are going on at this point, like this is the one where you got to get it right, because this is the one where You have two teams that are both legit national championship contenders and two teams that are going to be strong contenders to play again in Indianapolis. You might want to get the stuff right. Like, you've got your fancy new command center. Take a second and get the call right. I would much rather have 6 replays, each of which take 30 seconds and are just, let me take a look. No, okay, no, it's fine. And we know they review every play. We know that's yada, yada, yada. Every play is reviewed. Every scoring play is reviewed, yada, yada, yada. We know all that stuff. You want to make sure you get it right. You want to make sure if someone should have gotten called for targeting, at least take a look. Or maybe you should get called for targeting. Take a look. I mean, you've seen games swing on that in the past, so you might as well take a look, because it's been, that's something that is supposedly an area of emphasis. The Kaczmarek one is still, I mean, we talked about it earlier, but that was just, having seen the TV copy, like, why on earth did you not buzz that down? That was kind of an inexcusable mistake. And then, the final minutes of the game, the difference between 7 seconds and 6 seconds, that could be pretty substantial. As it turned out, it was really substantial. So, that was another one where you have all this stuff, you spent all the millions of dollars to get this replay center together, you might as well get the calls right. So that was, in a game like that, it's annoying to see officiating decisions in both directions having an impact on the game. You'd like to see them get things right.
Or not having an impact in terms of, getting it wrong, perhaps.
Yeah. I think that was kind of the end of my big takeaways. Do you have anything else?
No, I'm pretty much through them. I think the one last thing here is, did Ryan Day tell Travion Henderson not to get the first down at the end of the second quarter? When
I can't imagine why he would have told him not to. That was just a that's another one where it didn't end up costing Ohio State any points. That Oregon didn't come back and get points. But that was another one where they had the ball at the 30-something, their own 30-something yard line with about a minute left. You go down, you kick a field goal at that point, and then that kind of changes things going into halftime. It would have made it 24-22 Ohio State if they had done that. And boy, those extra 3 points could have been meaningful later in the game. And the Ohio State offense really moved the ball pretty consistently throughout the game. They didn't, other than the drive where they, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the Ohio State drive chart here. 10 plays, 75 yards, 4 plays, 13 yards. That was the one that ended with the fumble. 3 plays, -8 yards. 4 plays, that was the one that had a million false starts. 4 plays, 74 yards. 12 plays, 75 yards. 3 plays, 9 yards. That was the one. That was the one that ended with the Travion Henderson not getting the first down. 1 plays, 2 yards. That was -2 yards. That was right before the half. 6 plays, 79 yards. 5 plays, 15 yards. That was the one that ended with the fumbled snap. 13:53 and 8:49. So really, the fumble by Quinshon Judkins, multiple false starts, Travion Henderson not getting the first down when he probably could have, and the drop snap. Those were the 4 times that Ohio State got held to less than 49 yards on a drive, and all of them were somewhat self-inflicted. I mean, that's the good news is, if you can avoid those self-inflicted things, then you just score one of those drives, you score a field goal, and boy, that changes the end of game state quite a bit. But they didn't, and so now this is why you can look at the game as an Oregon fan and go, oh, if only we had not missed a field goal and missed a PAT and had gone for it on 4th and 1 at the goal line and all that kind of stuff, that you could have won by 2 scores. Well, Ohio State fans can say the exact same thing. If only they had not dropped the snap, had the false starts, had the it's very easy to look at that and say, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Each team could have won by 14, or it could have been about a 45-44 kind of game instead of 32-31. But even with the rewatch, I walk away thinking the exact same thing I walked away watching it live. I hope these two teams get to play again, because I would take. This is the whole point. This game, that type of game, that's the whole point of all the conference realignment stuff that they're doing. so that Georgia has a chance to be the first team since 1996 to play 2 top 5 matchups on the road, like matchups of 2 top 5 teams, when it's Georgia and Alabama and Georgia and Texas. Ohio State's going to get a chance to do that in just a couple weeks, unless Penn State or Ohio State does something stupid between now and then. Ohio State at Oregon, Ohio State at Penn State. So two teams getting to do something this year in the first 2 months of the season that hasn't happened in almost 30 years. This is why this is the pro side of the conference realignment stuff. You get a lot of these really, really great matchups, and they've all been pretty good games so far. There's not been a lot of blowouts.
Yep. And as I keep saying, to the people who thought that, or who have said that the 12-team playoff is going to kill the regular season because the games don't matter anymore, I have not seen any lack of emotion from any of these games, lack of interest, lack of excitement. These are all still people living and dying with these games. And then afterwards, a few days afterwards, realizing that they are still able to live with the teams and the games. So fantastic season all around so far. This one didn't go Ohio State's way. But before we go ahead and hit the thumbs up on the YouTube. If you could, we would appreciate that. Find us at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle if you are listening to this and would like to watch it. If you are watching and like to listen, you can find us anywhere. Just search Buckeye Weekly Podcast on your podcast platform of choice. 5-star ratings and reviews are always appreciated. And of course, you can continue to find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up, become a premium member. That is a fantastic way to support what we do. We would appreciate that. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.